Good evening. Town of Boston Planning Board meeting for October 3rd. Okay, do we have a motion to go into executive session?
I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
Any second? Okay, thank you.
We'll be in executive session for like 5 minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Enough excuses.
I'll give you this right after.
We were already on it. Thanks.
Okay, could I have a motion to get back into public session?
I'll make a motion to go into that to executive session.
Second. No objections? Fine. Back to public session. We just go around the table to introduce ourselves.
Mark Hopeflick, planning board member.
Ching Hua Chin, Chair.
Karen Tuffin, planning board member.
Jim Bosinas, board member.
Dan Ciarcia, consulting engineer of the planning board.
Sandy Melly, secretary.
Steve Coleman, wetland consultant for the board.
David Stolman, town planning consultant.
Kathy Zalansas, planning board attorney.
Thank you all for coming today. Our first item on the agenda is Baker, Devon and Sons, 52-1 and 52-3, Old Albany Post Road, architectural review, continuing the public hearing. The applicant here?
Yes, and I'm here on his behalf. My name is Matt, you know the yellow, who's keeping minutes. You were?
Thank you.
So I understand at the last meeting there were some technical questions, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have. Since the last meeting, we've modified the plans to include some details of engineering details and corrected a couple of the elevation errors. So I think the plans are correct as you've seen them, as you see them now, and the engineering details, there's one or two more details Dan tells me he'd like us to change or add, and we'll take care of those. They're relatively minor.
I've got a question to start off. Matt, it seems like when you look at the two lots in plan view, there's a distance of about 8 feet between the back of the house and the retaining wall in the back.
Yeah, I think it's about 9 or 10.
When you look at it in section, those two sections you prepared, it scales at about 4 feet. I'll show you.
Let me look. It should be the same. It's about 9 or 10 feet. Yeah, you're right. It's drawn incorrectly.
So
it should be at least 9 feet. Yeah, I think it's 9 or 10 feet. The plan view is correct.
I think the plan view shows about 8 feet, actually. It's a little hard to read because the the background is printed so light.
You know, and lot 1, I'm scaling it at 9 feet, and that's what it's intended. And lot 2 would be the same. We don't want to make the yard too small. We want to make it large enough. Obviously, the farther back we push it, we're fighting the slope.
Right, the retaining wall will get higher.
Exactly.
Right.
So,
So
but the plan is 9 feet.
We were unsure which was the right dimension.
9 feet.
Which is still fairly narrow.
I can't hear you.
Which is still fairly narrow for
It
a,
is.
for a
It
backyard.
is. I mean, we can make it wider because the town needs it, but then we're going to have a higher wall. We're trying to balance between having a reasonable yard and not too high of a wall.
Right.
Obviously, most of the good lots are already built. Most of the lots that are available have issues like steep property or whatever.
Some do.
Most, I think.
What are the other items that you were that you were planning to have changes on?
I can't hear you.
What were the other items that you were planning to have changes on your plan?
The only one I recall that I have to change now is, in one place we call that a CIP for the sewer pipe, and in one place we call that a SDR 35 for the sewer pipe. And since the town will accept SDR 35, we're going to go with SDR 35.
That was the only other change you were not contemplating?
That's the only change I recall that we need to do, yes. The sewer pipe will be SDR 35 for each lot.
Was there an issue about the facing on the retaining walls, or what they'd be constructed of?
The retaining wall in the front currently, there's a rubble stone retaining wall near the road, near the property line of the road. That's going to remain a rubble stone retaining wall. The retaining wall's interior we're going to be some sort of aesthetically pleasing design depending on the conditions as we excavate. We're hoping we find ledge rock here and there, and if we look behind the properties, in the back of the properties, you can see the exposed ledge rock. And then it comes down, especially on the lot in between these two lots, you can see the exposed ledge rock. So if the ledge rock comes down at a reasonable rate and we can anchor into that, that's going to alter the design because we'll use the ledge rock to stabilize everything. If we can't find the ledge rock at a reasonable depth, then obviously we'll have to put a wider footing in, and that will alter the design. So the design's going to be, in part, depending on where the ledge rock is. But the surface and the face of the design, the current plan is an aesthetically pleasing design, perhaps like a stone strong wall. I don't know if you've seen a stone strong wall, but it kind of looks like the Croton Dam to me. It's a concrete wall that mimics cut stone, hand-hewed stone.
The purpose of the planning board sitting as the ARB is to know what these things are going to look like ahead of time and approve of them. That's the whole point of being here.
Yes, well, for the purposes now, it's going to be a stone type veneer on the walls, or stone type look on the wall. Well, whether it's precast or poured is what I'm saying. We haven't made that decision yet, and that's going to depend on where we find the ledge rock. So some of these walls are precast, and sometimes you can use a form liner or a poured wall and get a stone look.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the planning board wants to see what this is going to look like ahead of time. And I don't think it's...
Well, we already have planning board approval. You mean the ARB?
This planning board is sitting as the ARB, so excuse me for calling them the planning board, but you're making a good point. This is an ARB, not the planning board.
Right.
So a lot of this approval is about aesthetics.
Right.
And it's important to see ahead of time what these things are going to look like, the facing.
Okay.
So do you have anything to show us?
Let's see if I have a picture on my phone that may help you. There's a couple different looks for the stone strong or the poured walls, and maybe some pictures might help you.
You don't have any samples?
Sample of the wall? Or samples of brochures, you mean? John brought some brochures. I'm not sure that's the most pleasing one, but that's an example of one that you can look at if you want to see one of those. Meanwhile, I'll see if I can find you a picture of a wall that may help you.
What is this a picture of?
I see. This is the type of wall that it is.
That's,
They come in a lot of different, facades, but
This is the first one that caught John's eye, and that's one of the alternatives we're looking at. The other one would be more like, it looks more like the Croton Dam, a hand-cut stone look. I'm trying to show you, find you a picture there.
Excuse me, Matt, doesn't this type of wall require a geogrid at some of the
No.
heights you're proposing?
No.
Well, if it's not a geogrid, then don't you have to use the blocks are like 5 feet deep?
The ones I'm thinking of are 42 inches deep at minimum, and sometimes they go 7 feet deep depending on the height you go.
Right. So,
And a lot would depend if you can anchor into the ledge rock. If you can anchor into the ledge rock, then you can utilize rebar and tension to hold the wall.
How do you anchor into the walls on the north and south of both properties?
Well,
Where you're adjacent, where you're showing this wall directly right up against the property line of those
Yeah.
properties.
There-
And
there-
it looks like on the plan, it looks like it's around 8 inches thick.
everything's drawn a minimum foot. My cursor in.
I see what 12 inches shows on the plan, and this thing looks like it's maybe 4 inches thick. 'Cause this thing says from here to here is 12 feet or 12 inches. I can't tell if that's 12 inches or 12 feet.
Yeah, it won't be less than a foot thick. I can
How do you
assure
anchor that? how do you anchor that wall into someone else's property?
You don't anchor it into someone else's property. You can anchor it using vertical anchors grounded 10 feet into the rock. You drill them in 10 feet with a track driller, but number 8 bars or J-hooks, and you can anchor that way. You can also put a toe footing, not a heel, but a toe footing, and do a cantilevered wall. Either one would work.
So my concern is
My
that-
concern also is, I'm still continuing, is it's gonna look like an alleyway of these retaining walls. This one's not so bad, but it looks like a big giant U, alleyway. Architecturally, it looks very displeasing.
I agree with you. The walls are going to be fairly high, and it will be fairly narrow. But there's no other way to accomplish a reasonable grade on the driveway and reasonable parking without having walls. So there will be retaining walls. If any design for this lot would require that, if you're going to have a driveway and on-site parking. Now, I think the board would agree that on-site parking and a driveway are important considerations for any development of this lot. So yes, there will be retaining walls, and yes, the lot is not that wide.
So my concern is with the way these walls will look from the road.
Okay,
So not just the alleyway, which is how it'll look to the neighbors, which is of concern.
I'm not sure the neighbors are going to see the alleyway as much as the people living there would see the alleyway. But from the road, you're going to see the rubble stone wall along the road, and you're going to see the house. The house will block the walls behind the house, so you won't see the walls
You
behind
won't
the
see
house.
the wall behind the house, but you'll see the 2 walls on either side.
Right, so if they're reasonably aesthetically pleasing, it's not going to look that bad, and it's not that narrow. So it should be a reasonable design.
You're still gonna see the wall behind the house. You might not see the entire wall. I
You're
mean, the
gonna
house
see
is
it-
built in,
You're going to see it on the side of the house, perhaps, yes.
the house is built in front of the rear wall, but you're gonna see the 2 corners of the rear wall.
Agreed, but the house is
And I
higher
think
than the wall.
we're having more issues with one lot than the other. I mean, a 14-foot high concrete wall is gonna be clearly visible from the street.
On the sides of
It's
the house.
taller than the
Ground floor.
Not taller than the roof.
It's up to the roof.
I mean, it's higher than the plate height.
According to your document.
According to the documents, it's almost as high as the roof.
It's almost as high, but the
The
roof
peak of the
blocks the
roof.
view except for on the sides of the house.
Okay, we're saying the same thing. but we're
Architecturally,
not
we're saying,
finding
is the architectural review,
all that
we're
great.
saying it doesn't look right. It doesn't look, architecturally, we're saying it doesn't look
It's
right.
completely out of character with everything else in the neighborhood.
But the other houses in the neighborhood don't have driveways that would meet current standards, do they? They don't. The other houses in the neighborhood don't have parking that would meet current standards. The house in between these 2 lots has a steeper driveway and can't fit 2 cars. We're trying to comply with the current rules, and this requires us to push the house back far enough to fit the cars in the driveway, and requires us to fight against the hill.
I understand that. There isn't another property in Ossining, I would think, that has this situation where you got retaining walls on the 2 sides of the property and 3 sides, let's say 3 sides of the property, just to be clear. So we're basically framing out the entire property, from property line to the rear retaining wall in order to make room for this. It makes for an enormous wall in the back.
It does. But on the other hand, we're looking at what I think is the higher priority is to have some sort of a yard to play in, or barbecue in, or do something in, and have reasonable grade to the driveway and reasonable steps into the house. In my mind, those are higher priorities. Now, maybe I'm wrong. If I am, tell me.
My priority is the next door neighbor.
Okay. So the next door neighbor has a lot with the exposed ledge rock in the back, and then he sort of terraced it and put gardens in. I don't think this is going to be that much different than he has.
Frankly, your 1 lot maybe applies to that comment, but
Lot 1?
the other
One
one,
on the left, lot 1?
the one with the reasonable sized walls.
Well, one other concern is the lot 3 it's heavily wooded now. I did not shoot that topo. I used the topo from the site plan that you folks approved a couple of years ago. So If that topo is incorrect and it looks more like Lot 1, then Lot 3 won't be as bad. I don't like using someone else's topography, but it wasn't
14
reasonable.
foot high versus 6 feet high is,
Big difference, but look at the
Big
slopes,
difference.
look at the elevations. It's the prior site plan approval that you had showed a lot higher
I just want to
topography
clarify, the board never granted a site plan approval of subdivision.
as part of the subdivision. They did grant site plan approval of the subdivision
There's
plat.
there's
No.
no site plan
No?
approval.
That's incorrect.
Just the subdivision.
All right,
There's no site plan approval in Allison. There's no family home.
it's news to me. In any event, on your subdivision approval, the contour lines were shown as I used. I took them from the subdivision plat.
Do you have a problem with those?
I'm just suspicious when it's that much
If
higher
you're
than
that
lot.
suspicious, you should have done a new one by yourself, shouldn't you?
Yes, I'd like to, but it didn't make sense to chop all the trees down in ahead of time. It didn't make sense to me. Perhaps it makes sense to you, but it didn't make sense to me to chop all the trees down to measure the topography. It's like a jungle out there. It would have taken a few days to do.
I
It
don't
makes
think
sense
you
at this
need to
point.
chop the trees down to measure the
I
topography.
can't hear you.
You don't have to chop trees down to measure the topography.
Well, okay, the weeds. You have to,
The
you have to
weeds,
mow the weeds
yeah,
down.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yes.
To be more accurate.
Yes, I agree.
But in addition to those considerations, I must say I'm having a difficult time visualizing it beyond the comments I've already made. And I would really like, if it's possible, to request visualizations of all 4 elevations and a three-dimensional rendering so that we can really see what it looks like from a couple of different spots.
You took it for lot 3.
both lots,
I mean,
Both lots.
both lots. Again, there's
Actually,
retaining
I was
walls,
gonna suggest that we separate the lots out so that maybe we can.
I like that
We
idea.
can, move at a different pace for each one.
Because
Because
it
one is the real problem.
mhm.
Do a lot on the right. Yes.
But-
I can understand that comment.
Is the applicant going to be author, is the applicant going to be in view with the concept of having a separate lot moving at different rates?
Yes.
I would be open to that.
And I'll propose that. You need somebody to propose it.
All right, so we would still. So he's not committed. If I understand, an applicant is not committed to this. Is that correct?
I can't hear you.
The applicant has not committed to this design yet.
He's committed to a stone look concrete wall for the retaining walls. So it will either be that stone or the one I think is prettier than that I'm still trying to find a picture of.
So, if I might ask, and perhaps your picture will explain it, this has not only the texture that we're talking about, but coloration, natural-ish coloration.
That one is naturalist coloration. The one I'm looking at has, it's more of a gray coloration. This is a picture of a small section of it, but you get the idea. And it looks more, to me, it looks more like the hand-hewn stone on the crooked dam. But it's gray.
can you just bring that up to the camera so that they can see it in
Sure.
the camera?
Where's the camera? In the back?
Up there?
Yeah.
Also email it to the secretary, please.
Okay. You know how close you go. Yes, I'll send that to you. See, I prefer this one. John liked the brown look for the stone. He's undecided, but it will be an aesthetically pleasing wall.
Do you
You
also
know,
want to see the
the
manufacturer?
applicant has built several houses around West. The applicant has built several houses around
I'm
Westchester.
sorry, do you also want to see the manufacturer and the spec sheet on this, whatever you're
That's
emailing?
engineering.
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
sure,
just-
I'm sure the engineer will review the design when we get to that point.
I mean,
No,
just
actually,
the
we need
product, to
aesthetics.
understand the
Yeah, no,
product.
We need the specs
The
on this.
product is concrete.
We need the specs on, we need the
Yeah, but the
catalog
stone
cut sheet
veneer.
for this.
That's not a stone veneer, that's concrete.
Whatever it's made out of, we need the catalog cut sheet for it.
Is there a reason why you just can't accommodate our requests?
Because they asked for the stone veneer, it's not stone veneer, it's a concrete
No,
block.
they asked for the model so that we can understand the manufacturing
That's
background
fine,
for it.
that's
Color,
fine.
Good, then just say
color,
yes.
size, you know, the basics of the look of it.
That's
If
fine.
we can get a color, if we can get what size the prefabricated stones are gonna be, you know, so that we have an idea of what you're actually
That's
gonna
fine.
put there. We
The
don't
ones-
need
the one- the ones in the picture I-
construction aspects of it.
The ones in the picture I showed you are typically two-sized blocks. The blocks are 8 feet wide, 3 feet high, or 4 feet wide, 1.5 foot high.
We need that.
And they're made by a patented design called Stone Strong. These are manufactured by a company called LHB in Kingston, New York. We'll provide you with the cut sheets as you requested for all this, but I'm trying to, give you the
Again, we
information.
don't need the structural aspects of it. We know that's gonna be designed and on the construction documents. But the aesthetic aspects to it, the
That's
color
fine.
and the size of the blocks,
That's fine.
that's what we need to say.
So, now, is it your intention that if we get approval and we tell you that we're gonna build a brown wall like that picture, that we're not allowed to change it to something like this? Is that what you're saying?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Well, unless you were to find both equally okay.
We can't tell without having a better
No, I understand, but.
documentation from the applicant.
I understand, the documentation is not good, especially waving around a cell phone. So once you get those, you could have alternatives, right, if you wanted to.
Sure.
If you like
Okay,
them
so-
both.
Or you could prefer to take the gray one, and then you would have to be, the
And-
applicant would have to
and
do the gray
For the record,
one.
from the photograph you just showed me, I'm not opposed.
Okay.
But for the record, the process is that you need to provide it, and we need to have it on record.
That's fine. We'll send you both, and you can tell us if either one's rejected or if you accept both. And if there's a third one we find, we'll send you that also.
Perfect.
So-
I'd prefer, if we can try to move this file along, if you want to give us conditional approvals, conditioned on accepting the colors, it may save us another trip back.
We still
But
ask
for a
for
lot
some.
more-
You know, it would have saved a lot of trips back if you'd given us the documentation beforehand and appeared before this board properly.
We
What do
also
you mean- what do
asked
you mean
for a
if you-
3D
why-
type
why are
of
you- Why are
rendering.
you talking to me like that? Is there something you don't like about me?
I don't know you from Adam. It's
Okay.
okay. I just would like you
I
to
didn't think we
accommodate
had
the
that.
reasonable requests from the board.
I'm trying to, but I don't really
Good.
understand.
Then don't take an attitude.
I'm not the one talking to you like you're talking to me.
Whatever. I
So-
think the record for this application speaks for itself.
So other than the cut sheets for the type of retaining wall, is there anything else you'd like us to provide?
So I'd like you to recommit, or the applicant to recommit to using natural stone on all of the road frontage and going into the driveways, natural stone walls, not any of these concrete or any other non-natural stone wall. That's been committed by the applicant previously, and I would like that recommitted.
So it's your opinion that a concrete wall that looks like stone along the driveway would be unacceptable?
Correct.
Okay.
Would like a little bit more
Yes.
detailing on the retaining walls on the north and south sides of both properties, besides just a rectangular little box. I know it goes to the next level, I'm just very concerned.
I'm sorry, I missed what you said, Mark.
I'm just a
sorry.
little concerned, I would like to see a little bit more detailing
Detail.
on your little drawing of this little rectangular box which shows a retaining wall.
Are you
At the
referring-
last meeting, I brought up, and I'm just gonna talk very generally, I brought up architectural graphic standards, which is done by the American Institute of Architects. Those through a few details which I gave to the applicant, the ones on the wall right there, those pages. I would like to see a little bit more detail. I know we're only the Planning and Architectural Review Board. In order for me to make a logical assessment of approval of yay and nay, I'm just gonna say something very carefully. Weebles wobble and they don't fall down. I don't want a retaining wall that's not strong enough. I don't understand from this drawing how that retaining wall on the north and south side of both of that property, without going into the neighbor's property, is built. I'd like to see a little bit more detail of that. A sketch, maybe a hand sketch, a little bit more detail so I can make an honest assessment of whether or not to approve or disapprove this application for these retaining walls. It's scaring the life out of me. I don't want to have on my conscience someone getting injured from a retaining wall falling down. End of subject.
So Mark, just to clarify, are you talking about the retaining walls along the lot lines?
Yes. The north and south, if I'm going by the
side lot
arrow.
lines. You're talking about the side
Side
lot
lot
lines.
lines.
Side, yes.
Yes, okay.
Very simple request. I can't have it on my conscience. I can't vote for something and know that a year from now it collapses and I have it on my conscience. It's not happening.
Well, none of us want.
I really want to see a detail that works.
So I'd like to make one other comment regarding the lot number 3. I was speaking with the neighbor, Mr. Rizzi, and
That's the neighbor in between the two lots or on the other side?
no, it's on the west side, on the right-hand side if you're facing the lot.
South side. okay.
South side.
South side. So he was hoping that the applicant would be able to keep the very mature evergreen hedge that is between their properties, but is technically on the applicant's property, because it currently provides a very nice visual block, and it would in the future as well. And I'd like to make that request if it's possible.
Well, maybe we can come to some sort of compromise, like we could transplant them over the property line on his property. That might work for him.
He doesn't have the room. It's a very narrow property, just as yours is, but it's been there for 50 years.
Wow. Have to take a look, see what we can do. We'll do our best to accommodate some sort of buffer or
But
shield.
I wouldn't mind if, I'd like to keep the discussion going then, so at the next meeting, could you report back on what your thoughts are on that?
Yes.
Thank you. So just to make sure it wasn't lost in all the other discussions, I am requesting that we get drawings showing all 4 elevations of each of the 2 properties and a 3-dimensional rendering of the south property.
Lot 3?
Lot 3,
Okay.
showing the walls accurately.
Is that a yes?
Do I have a choice? I don't think I didn't see that.
Well, you
I
have
didn't-
you
I didn't- I
had
didn't-
buck
Huh?
requests in the past, so I was wondering whether that was an actual yes, and you just,
No, I was thinking about how to accomplish that. That's what I was thinking about.
Thank
That's why I
you.
didn't respond.
thank you.
Okay. But I took that as a demand more than a request. So that would be a yes.
Thank you.
Does the board have any other issues at this point?
I keep getting these headbutts from the same individuals. So you can bring that out.
We can proceed, we can limit his expenses by looking at lot 3, because that's more, but it's more of an issue. But it's really a package, so let's look at it as a package. Does the staff have any more comments on this matter?
Not at this time, no.
Dan, you had some comments. Had the applicant received a copy of your comments?
Yes, yeah. I think most of it is small matters, and obviously the retaining wall is an issue we need to delve into a little more detail on. But I think the rest of the stuff is pretty straightforward, and we had a conversation with the applicant and engineer, and we week or two ago, we touched on some of the stuff, but we still have the, I guess, the old plan. Right, am I correct? We didn't receive anything new
I think you
subsequent
did.
to our
I
conversation.
think you did, but the board didn't. Subsequent to our conversation, I modified the plan to add, for example, the cleanouts and
Okay.
the water valves, and sent that to
Okay.
you, but
All
I
right.
didn't, the board didn't get that, it was past their
Okay.
deadline for submission.
Does the applicant have a response to Dan's comments at this, Dan Garcia's comments at this time? If you've received them?
Well, it sounds like some have been addressed already.
I believe they've all been addressed except for the question about the PVC and the CIP, which I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. I believe that was the one comment I still have to address.
Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on this matter? Seeing none. Okay, what else do we need to do on this? Carla?
Well, we're in a public hearing right now, so we need to adjourn that to the next meeting.
Okay, so we need a date certain?
If we have a date certain, we don't have to renotice it.
I have one more question. So on lot 3, has it been looked into at all for the possibility of using the retaining wall itself as the foundation wall of the house?
Yes, that's one of the things we have considered. But it interferes with the design of the house because that would limit the windows and et cetera like that and the rear access. You need wells for all of them. And it just seemed easier and a better design and more marketable design to do it this way. But I have done designs like that in other cities and they've worked. So I know exactly what you're thinking about, and we did think
Because
about it.
I can't imagine how you're going to resolve this 14-foot wall without doing something like that.
There are sometimes big retaining walls.
Not necessarily in residential neighborhoods,
Sometimes in residential neighborhoods.
not where I've seen them.
Okay, I guess we'll need a motion to adjourn it to a specific day? Okay, the next meeting, Sandy, is on,
October 17th.
okay, do I have a motion to adjourn this public hearing to October 17th?
Why don't we find out, does that suit you to make the changes, do the
I
things,
believe we'll get it done by then.
and get it in by, when's the deadline for the next meeting?
Today's the 3rd, right? So,
The October 9th.
I'm concerned about the three-dimensional, but we'll see if we can get somebody to do that. I won't have time to do that.
then we can do
We'll
it
see
on
if we can
November
get that done.
7th.
I can't hear you.
You need the X amount of days, so if you can't get it in by that time, then it'll be the 7th.
If we can't get it done by then, we'll notify the board and then we'll push it back. But we'll do our best to get it in by the 9th.
I mean, if we're just doing this in elevation, do we need it to be three-dimensional?
We still wanna have a good look at it. It's really hard to visualize what he's describing.
Yes, it really is.
And again, without seeing how that wall
I
is
mean, if
being,
you have an
how
accurate
thick
side,
it is, it's
accurate
rectangle.
side elevation, that's not enough.
I would really like it three-dimensional. And, I mean, it doesn't have to be, you know, with a lot of, it doesn't have to have a lot of architectural detail and three-dimensional. Just to, you know, get be able to visualize it from a number of different areas, a number of different spots.
I mean, right now, it just looks like a big trench.
Right. It looks like a big swimming pool, 14 feet deep.
Okay.
Okay, so we're set for the next day, and we could have a motion for the adjournment to that day?
I'll make the motion.
No objections? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the Village of Ossining Water Treatment Plant, 25 Reservoir Road. Continuing the public hearing on the site plan.
Is it holding, take 2, that's down?
Take 2, pass it down.
They're collated already, 2, 2, and 2.
Oh, 2. Why couldn't we get pictures like this?
Because they have more money.
It's a color printer, right, really? Seriously?
$3.
It's like,
Maybe we'll close this. If you give us a second, we're gonna reload those.
That's
They-
okay.
They just disappeared on us.
I would have used the same material. Better than what they started with.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, we're set again. Chairman Chin, members of the Town Planning Board, thank you for having us back. Again, I'm Paul Fraioli, I'm the Public Works Director and Engineer for Village Boston. And with me this evening is Andrew Keese, our Water and Sewer Superintendent, as well as two representatives from our consultants, who I think you're familiar with by now. Julie Erzner, who's going to be doing the presentation tonight, and Michael Broder from Hazen and Sawyer in Manhattan. They were charged with designing our new 7 MGD potable water treatment plant to be constructed on the site for our existing Indian Brook filtration plant in Crotonville in the town of Boston. That said, this we anticipate being our final planning board ARB meeting that answers some of the few remaining questions and tasks that were charged by the board to us. So we hope to do that tonight with these renderings. And we are discussing internally about attending the zoning board meeting on the 15th of this month, and then returning to the planning board for final plan approval, or which is necessary prior to going to construction documents and public bidding for the plan. So that said, again, I want to introduce Julie Erzner, who's going to present these two renderings that incorporate some of the details, particularly the color of the tile that you requested at the last meeting. I also believe that this specification depicted on the drawings here are what is found in the renderings that were left in the last meeting, but if they didn't make their way to this meeting, we brought another set of renderings that you can review in this meeting as well. Julie?
Thanks, Paul. As Paul said, we're back here to present a change to the rendering from the last planning board meeting on September 5th, when there was a request to change the color of the tile that was selected. I brought two renderings of the plant that you've seen before, so the only difference in the design is the color, basically, of the tile. So this is a rendering showing the entranceway into the site. You can see the plants in the distance, and then we had front elevation, a rendering of the front elevation of the plant. I brought the tile samples again with us because the software that we use to create the rendering isn't capturing the exact color of the tile. You can see that when I pass this around. So I will do that over here. So it's the, yes, yeah, the top
top
three.
tier, okay.
Exactly. And
So what we asked for last time, like you originally had this row right here, and we asked the planning board at the last meeting to go to the top tier.
correct. And I believe that was to achieve an effect to have it be earth tones and blend into the environment more in around the site. So we're happy with the effect that moving to these shades achieved on the look of the terracotta tile on the plan, and hoping that it's it meets what the architectural review last planning board meeting was looking for. We have really no other changes to the facility other than this.
Does the board have any comments? Questions? Does the staff have any comments or questions? No. Dan, you did have a memo on this matter, right?
Yes.
Very good. What do we need to do on this? They're waiting for a variance from the ZBA.
Right. They've gotten their negative declaration, so they can go to the ZBA, as Paul said, seek their variance, hopefully get that from the ZBA, and then come back for site plan approval and ARB approval.
Yeah, the ZBA will actually be a continuation. We went there first, they referred us to you, and now we'd like to go back on the 15th.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Okay,
Is this gonna be part of
we don't need that.
That was inside the,
is this part of
Oh,
the
it's
building
just
materials?
protecting the tile,
Is
yeah.
there anyone in the audience?
Yeah, is there any members of the public
Somebody runs
interested in
into
this
the
matter? Seeing no members of the public interested in this matter at this point? We don't need a motion on this, right? We're just adjourning this?
This should be adjourned to, when do you think it was back?
We could put you in and then you tell us
Yeah,
when it's
I guess we
available.
can coordinate with Sandy.
Well, we'd like to adjourn it to a date certain so that we don't have to renotice the public hearing.
So if you know the planning board in date in November?
7.
November 7th, yes.
Okay, do I have a motion to adjourn it to November 7th?
Does that work?
Yes.
Yes.
I'll make the motion.
I'll say.
Seconds? No objections?
No objection.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, look forward to seeing you all again, thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the learning experience, child care facility, 530 North State Road, site plan review, continuation of public hearing.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Adam Wexstein from the law firm of Hockman, Tortorella and Wexstein, representing the applicant. I know we've spoken to you and gone through some of the salient aspects of the proposal before. In light of the fact that it's a public hearing, we were planning to do a brief presentation of all aspects, if that's okay with the board. What we're proposing on this site is the learning experience, a daycare center. It is approximately a 1-acre site in the GB zoning district. The proposed use is permitted as of right under the town's zoning ordinance, and in fact, our proposal complies with the dimensional and bulk requirements of the town zoning ordinance, other than with respect to signage, which I may get back to later, but I won't bore you with at the moment. We believe that this is a situation where we have a piece of property that is currently underutilized. There's no control of the stormwater runoff. Frankly, we've broken pavement and earth there. And what we're proposing to do here is to make improvements to the site in connection with the daycare center that we believe will improve the environmental conditions, including controlling quantity and quality of stormwater. We believe the building as shown and the landscaping is attractive. As Jay Fane will discuss later, there's been wetland mitigation that is proposed, or I should say, mitigation within the buffer to the water course, which is to the east of the site, crosses through a corner of the site. All positive things. We have, in the course of this process, had memos going back and forth between your environmental consultant and ours. We've addressed some of those issues at previous meetings. We've addressed some of them in responses. Again, Jay Fane will speak to that, our environmental consultant, a little bit later. And the other change, there are a few changes to the plan, but one of them that the board had asked was that we take the elevation, the western elevation facing North State Road, and try to make it look more like the second front of the building, and that change has in fact been made. So what I'd like to do, to go into The more interesting part, the operations and what's actually proposed, to have Matthew Jarmel, who's an architect and also a principal of the applicant, take you through a little more of what's actually going to be happening there. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Jarmel. Am I required to qualify myself as an expert witness?
No.
Okay, very good. I'm the architect for the project, and what we propose to develop here in Ossipee is a child care center that will be leased to a national provider of child care called the Learning Experience. Learning Experience is headquartered in Florida, but they have facilities throughout the country. They currently are operating about 230 facilities around the country, actually expanding into the United Kingdom. They have about 70 locations in various stages of development throughout the country as well. They operate centers Monday through Friday. Hours of operation are 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. And they provide child care services to children that are as young as 6 weeks of age to approximately 5 years of age. They're licensed by the state to provide these services, and they provide an educational curriculum as part of their program. So they're not just babysitting, so to speak, but they're also educating children that are in the facility. The proposed facility is 10,000 square feet in area. There's a rendering up on your screen in here. The building is designed to fit into the neighborhood and take on sort of what I'll call a quasi-commercial residential look. It utilizes brick as a base that comes up to the underside of the windowsills or water table. We use an exterior siding material called hardy plank, which, if you're familiar with it, is a cementitious material designed to simulate wood siding, but it's very durable, it lasts a long time. We create a sloping roof, so it takes on the look of a residential building, but in the center of the roof is a well. That well is designed to hide and screen all mechanical equipment. It provides both a visual screen and an audible screen. The rendering that you see there has not been updated to reflect the comments from the last time we were at the board in terms of making the elevation that fronts North State Road look more like a front of the building. So what I'm putting up here are drawings that were also submitted to the board, are two-dimensional elevations of the building. And the elevation I'm pointing to now is the elevation that would face the street. And what we've done is we've added a gable to the elevation. We've added a sign. That sign requires a variance. We'll talk about that later tonight if there's time. And we've added some brick pilasters up the side of the building, so it looks more like a front. But the main entry remains on the side elevation facing the playground. That's really for the safety of the children. The layout is designed so that parents can park in front of the door without having to cross the drive aisle and walk their children in. Part of the design of the building is that the columns that support an overhang canopy are designed to look like children's blocks. They say ABC 1, 2, 3 on them, and there's a main entry door there. I'm putting up a floor plan of the facility that shows various classrooms within the building. Pointing to where the main entry is, which is in the center of the long side of the building. And on the far right, to your right of the plan, shows the elevation that faces the street. And for the most part, the facility has a central corridor, double-loaded corridor with classrooms off of it. Classrooms are sized to accommodate various age groups of children. Included on my drawing, we provide a chart that follows New York State law as to the age of the children that are in the room, the teacher ratio of caregivers per the age of the student, and the square footage requirements based on age. So it's a very detailed calculation. The rooms are perfectly sized to do that. And this facility, if it's approved and reaches full capacity, is estimated to have a licensed capacity of 146 children, which would require 24 caregivers. In addition to the interior program, this project also will have an exterior playground, which has been quite a bit of discussion leading up to this. this meeting in terms of where it should be located, how it should be set back from the stream. But basically, there's an exterior playground, which is also a licensing requirement. It's sized in accordance with licensing that provides outdoor fresh air, weather permitting, for the children to play in. It's actually kind of pulled off and pointing into the corner of the building in 2 locations on the building. It didn't fit on the sheet, so they just broke it away. And there's 2 playgrounds. There's what they call an infant playground and a preschool playground, so that there's age-appropriate equipment set up in each of the areas of the playground for the children. You'll note that each area has a picnic area with a canopy over it, so that allows for outdoor activity and provide for shade protection for the children. Playground surfacing, which our landscape environmental consultant will talk about, is pervious and allows water to drain through it. It's a combination of turf and rubber play surfaces to the property. As far as operations concerned, the way the center operates, and there's sometimes a misconception in the industry or public how child care centers operate. Although I told you there's potentially 148 children here, unlike a public school, they don't all show up at once. The center opens at 6:30. We find that parents will drop off children from about 6:30 to 9 a.m. every morning, and they can pick them up really as early as noon, but typically like between 4 and 5 to as late as 6:30 in the afternoons. Parents are required to park. They walk their child. The front doors are unlocked during business hours, but the inner vestibule door is locked. Parents are given a key fob, so only parents can get in. If any of us visited and we didn't have a child enrolled, we'd have to be buzzed in. And then when they're brought into the reception desk, there's a touch screen monitor where each child has an individual PIN code that the parent enters, and they logged in, and then they're taken to the classroom. We have a traffic engineer here tonight, if there's time or interest, that can talk, but has studied the operation of several learning experiences, and they find that that time to drop off takes about 5 to 7 minutes. Typically, you never see more than 6 or 8 parents there at any given time. So if you figure one parking space can turn over at least 10 to 12 or 13 times an hour if need be. So there's ample parking based on the design, and the facility allows for that kind of spread out drop-off pickup procedure of the children. Some interesting statistics that we found is that on any given day, 10% of the children are typically out sick. They're young children, they're building immune systems, so they tend to be sick frequently. In addition to that, we found that about 25% of the children in every facility are siblings, so they come in the same vehicle. So it sounds like a lot of children, but when you spread it out over the course of several hours and take into account that children are sick and that there's a large percentage of siblings, it actually cuts down the amount of trips that are generated as a result of it. With that, a little brief on operation. I'll just kind of mention child safety. Buildings obviously designed in accordance with the state building code. New York uses the International Building Code. Under that code, child care actually has a dual use classification, not to be mixed up with zoning use, but it has an institutional use classification for any children less than 2.5 years of age, and an educational use classification for children over 2.5. The interesting thing about that is that institutional use criteria assumes that the occupants of the building don't have the physical or mental capacity or development capacity to exit the building on themselves in an emergency. As a result of that, you'll see in our floor plan that the code requires a lot of life safety features built into the building. For example, any room with more than 10 people has 2 means of egress. So you'll see a lot of doors to the exterior. You'll also see in our plan and our site plans that we have a fence around the building to catch children if they leave the building. You'll see that the building is equipped with a sprinkler system, a fire alarm system. It's single story in height, although child care, if you have, is allowed to be more than 2 stories, but not the institutional portion. So you have to keep children that are under 2.5 on the first floor as well. So it's a very safe building. There's closed circuit TV requirements as part of the state facility standards. And every classroom, you can see in the plan because it's small, but every classroom along the hall corridor has a window so that you can observe the children as well. With that said, that essentially completes my testimony. I appreciate your time this evening, and I'd be pleased to address any questions you may have.
I have a few. The sewer system on North State Road, is it can accommodate these 140 kids? Because I know you're putting a lot of bathrooms.
I did not do the civil engineering work. Our civil engineer has communicated with the sewage authority, I believe has received will serve letters.
I'd like to see that type letter. I have a few other comments. With regards to the stream, which is a tributary to the Rockefeller Botanical River. I live nearby this, and it's also, this is very close to Ryder Park, and I have some photos over here that I'm just going to go over in a few minutes. I haven't seen anything on the plan that's showing 1 inch or 1% or 2% of enhancing the waterway that was there. I hear more concern about the stormwater, but I'm just going to walk the public and everyone else on the planning board just through some of the photos that I have up here.
Just if there are questions when you're done,
Yes.
our environmental consultant will respond.
So, this is a Google map which I took this morning. This is Ryder Park up here. This is North State Road right here. Ryder Park goes right here, but here's, and I don't know what it's called, but I'm calling it Ryder Pond, for lack of a better term, which is right here. The Learning Center is right here. This is where you're planting it. That's where the Garden Center is right here. But if you look very carefully, out of Ryder Park right here, it goes through this, continuing on this way here, crossing over into this element right here, which is continuing on, which is then go from here, meandering around, then going right across North State Road. These were taken 2 weeks ago, not this past weekend, the weekend prior. I'm more concerned about something like this. This is what I would like it to look like, instead of being 2 round 4-foot pipes that are running under your property. I'd like to know what elements, we all live in this town, and all the residents in this town moved here looking at this park, and it's a cherished park that we have here. These streams, the people that live along here, this is like our children's, it's something for our children and our children's children. I'd like to know what, I'm for the Learning Center, I'm for this building, I just don't see the applicant giving 1%, 2% of what they're designing to the environment and enhancing it. I see a parking lot being built over this pipe. You called it earlier, and I'm just trying to use the terminology, the stormwater and the water course goes through part of the property. The water course, which you call the water course, is this river. It's a river. Okay, no matter what it is, it's a river. It goes through your property, yes. It goes to the back of the property, then it goes right, goes horizontally across, continuing on all the way down this way. Right or wrong, it's there. It's a commercial area, yes, you have every right to do what you want to. I would just like the applicant, you're the lawyer, you're the architect, you're the consultant. I'd like the applicant, the Learning Center, the people that are doing it, to think about giving back a little bit to the town of Austining, environmentally, something in this element, in this place. I'm not done. Okay. I see nothing on this property. I see a playground being built on top of it. I see the little water course up in front being exactly the same element. I asked in the prior meetings twice about salt and sand and things like that. This is what, quote, it's the Learning Center. Wouldn't it be nice if these children learned something about the environment? I don't see that. I would like the applicant, I don't want the architect, I don't want the lawyer or the consultant, I want the client themselves, the Learning Center themselves, the physical applicant, to come and tell me what they're doing for the environment, what they're gonna do for the town of Austining to make this river a little bit better than what it is today.
Mark, if the-
I'm sorry.
If the applicant wants his representatives to
Yes.
speak, it's okay, all right?
Yes. I'm just not seeing anything.
So, thank you for sharing these pictures. It looks like a beautiful park. I haven't personally experienced a lot. So just for a matter of clarity, I am the architect for the project, but I'm also a principal in the development. I don't represent the learning experience. The learning experience is the tenant for the building, but I represent them, when I wear my architect hat, I represent them on a national basis as their architect. I've literally designed over 200 centers for them around the country. And I think that what we've done, we believe we've listened to you in terms of your concerns. Our environmental consultant has met with the city or the Boston's or the town's environmental consultant, and we think that we've done this, responded in a very positive way in terms of ways to enhance the environment here, and really, to some degree, restore the stream to a safer condition than it's in right now. I mean,
Can you show me on the piece of property, on the site plan, what part of this stream you are touching?
I would be pleased to, but I'd ask Mr. Fain to do that on my behalf.
I'd like to
He
see
is-
on the physical plan
he is
with the magic marker.
Environmental marker.
Sure.
For the record, Jay Fain from Jay Fain and Associates, 134 Round Hill Road, Fairfield, Connecticut. I'm the project environmental consultant. I am a wetland ecologist and vegetation ecologist, forage ecologist, and I put my record on the background of the last meeting, so I'm not going to go over all that again. Where to start? The overriding concern of this project from the very beginning, the first phone call, was the environmental setting of this project and how to develop this project in a sensitive manner with the resources that are available on the site. From the very beginning, I've been involved with the planning of the project. I assessed the wetlands, I delineated the wetlands, I provided feedback to the client in terms of what we can do on this site to enhance and restore what is, by any measure, a degraded environment. I went into quite a bit of detail of this last time. I went over the whole watershed assessment from the very top. I've been to those sites that you show there. I explained that it's very nice up in the right part. It's almost montane, the character of the stream, and then as we approached North State Avenue, things suddenly went very bad for our first street.
North State Road.
North State Road. We looked carefully at the project and what we could do to enhance the existing environment. My personal preference would be to do as little as possible within the stream itself for a number of reasons. And so I focused on the riparian zone of the stream, which is the area that borders the stream, to improve the environment, to remove the non-native invasive species, to add native wetland plantings that provide wildlife value and provide value for water filtration, and that's what we focused on here, and that's what I think we've accomplished very well. As I mentioned the last time.
So wait, so I asked if you added 1 extra inch onto the stream, to opening up the stream. Yes or no?
I don't want to touch the stream because it's
So
sustainable.
all you're doing is getting rid of all the non-invasive plants?
That is not correct.
Okay.
And I think I need to maybe.
All you're getting rid, all you just said was, I'm gonna clean up all the non-invasive plants.
That is not correct, because, again, I'm a
Continue.
certified restoration ecologist, and my philosophy is to do no harm, and I do not want to do any harm. I want to do more here. There's a limited amount of things that we can do for the stream, and I do not want to impact it in any way. I've worked with Mr. Coleman. He's made some suggestions to what we can do in terms of restoration and stabilization of the stream banks. To the extent that we can do that, to the extent that it's on our property, And here's the extent of the stream that's on our property right here. This is off our property, by the way.
Excuse me, that's incorrect. And I'll just do it for the public. I'm going to take you to the plan. I don't like being lied to. I don't like being lied to.
Mr.
Okay? Right
Hoffler,
here.
Mr. Hoffler.
The stream goes right here, and then boom, this way. That's the way it goes. You did not say that.
Mark,
I'm sorry. I am sorry. I do not like being lied to. The public does not like being lied to.
Mark, what
It's shown on the other map. Do not say something that's incorrect.
When I started this, I said part of it is on-site and part of it is off-site. Jay did not say. Mr. Hoffler, if you'd let our expert speak, it would
It's
be
right
greatly
here.
appreciated.
It's right here.
That is piped through the property.
Right?
You're correct.
Here's the line of your property, right here.
And this part over
This
here.
is the waterway right here.
Look, this is
Mark.
off-site here.
Mark, he
I'm
was
calming
pointing,
down.
he was pointing
I'll
off.
calm down.
Listen, Mr. Hoffler, if you're going to behave this way, I'm just going to ask you to recuse yourself. You're obviously biased. And I want to say one thing. I am not a wetlands consultant, I'm a lawyer. You're bound by a lot of things. One is the U.S. Constitution, another is the enabling legislation that creates your powers. Your planning board doesn't have the power to say, well, I want you to make improvements for the town. What your planning board has the power to say is, I want you to mitigate the impacts of what you're proposing. And we are doing that. And that's not to say we won't consider what you request if you request more than that. But we do have limitations. One is, as a consultant, as Jay will speak to, we don't want to do harm. And two is, no matter what you believe as to what that survey shows, a portion of that stream that's daylighted, a significant portion, is not on our property, and we do not have the right to touch it. So that's the context where we go, and I'd like you to just let Jay finish, and we'll answer
Go ahead,
any
Jay.
questions you
Go
have.
ahead.
As I said, we have a 5-tiered plan for the restoration and wet level protection of the stream itself. And number one is the removal of the invasive species, which are prevalent throughout the site and which definitely detract from the quality of the environment. Second is, once invasive species are removed, is to provide a robust planting of native plants, again, with high wildlife pollinator value, and to act as a buffer and as a filter, and to have native plantings. Even in the landscape portion of the site, we're using all native plantings for the site. These are not exotic plantings, or native plantings, even for outside the wetland buffer. The entire
Could you
site.
please point to those plants you talked about, because you were pointing to the side, you're talking about a few trees. He's talking about
Just let him
5
finish.
trees.
Let him finish.
There's more than 5 trees, sir. Again, the next layer of protection is the pervious playground surface to promote stormwater infiltration. Again, we provided additional clarification on that act at Mr. Coleman's request, and we were having the pervious playground is sitting on top of a gravel bed that acts as a filter basin. There's underground storage to mitigate the stormwater peaks, and there's a proprietary oil and grit separator to polish stormwater generated from impervious areas. I do have some more to add to, but I think it's proper for Mr. Coleman to review his memo before I add to that. And one last thing I wanted to bring, a request of the board. They had asked me for more biological information regarding the stream itself. I did provide that information. I do have copies of that. If you'd like me to get handed out tonight, I'd be happy to do so. If you'd like me to submit it later,
Have we
I would do
received that
so.
already?
Excuse me?
Sandy, have we received that already?
I don't.
No, it's just here.
Oh, you just
I bring it tonight. I just was able to complete it. I did, let me just say, I made 3 stations at the site. Station 1 is at the entrance right here. Station 2 is the exit to outfall right here. And Station 3 is where the stream leaves the site. I performed investigation on all 3 of those stations, including dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, conductivity. I did, as requested, do the biological characteristics. I did document the black node days and the creek chubs. I do have pictures that accompany this report. I have recharacterized the stream type based on other information as a defined open channel perennial low flow stream. I've provided information about the watershed itself. I've characterized the stream as Straley Stream Water 5. I did do the instantaneous flow rate, which came out about 0.3 CFS a second using a cross-sectional flow method. So we did do quite a bit more investigation of stream at your request, and I do have your copies of the report here with the photo documentation. I really think that we've tried to go the extra effort here. There's a limitation to how many things we can do. Again, I don't have a problem doing stream restoration where we can do it and where we can accomplish something. But again, you're leaving yourself open to kind of like playing God sometimes. You don't want to touch something that isn't kind of broken. I agree with Mr. Coleman that stabilization of the stream bank itself is necessary, but if you start monkeying around that stream in this location, you don't have a lot of room to work, you don't have a lot of place to make a sinuous channel, which would normally be, you can actually do more harm. So I think I've focused on protecting the stream itself and letting the stream continue the way it is, and that's our emphasis. Happy to answer any questions.
Before we continue, Steve, do you have any comments on your bill?
Yeah, I'd like to go through a few things. I've been working with Jay, since the inception of it to, look at the site, and I think it's important for the board to realize that it's a very disturbed site that had a lot of land use history. When it was a Briarcliff nursery, the entire site was really converted to nursery operations. So there's a tremendous amount of disturbance, a lot of compacted soils, and as such, a lot of invasive species have come in. The stream channel itself, there was a lot of excavation. The stream channel was channelized, and so there's a lot of prior land use history that has kind of shaped that property. And so it's difficult to look at it in terms of having a highly functional buffer system. So within the code, there's opportunities to look at how to mitigate and enhance and restore buffers that have been disturbed. And one of my first comments was to based on the town's code, is to look at how to minimize and avoid impact. And I asked them to address that based on the size of the building and whether they could pull the building and change the footprint so that it would be outside of the buffer. They came back and said that programmatically and from an economic aspect, they didn't feel that they could accommodate a full removal outside of the regulated buffer. There's about roughly 1,900 square feet difference. They would have to either reduce the size of the building or the overall building footprint to accommodate that. Because it's such a disturbed system, then what Jay has done through the biological assessment and looking at the site is, if they're trying to minimize the amount of disturbance that's remaining within the wetland buffer area. And so what they've done is look at what can they do to then enhance and restore, the functions provided by that watercourse buffer area. I think it's important to point out, and Jay did that, is that there's very little of the actual watercourse on the property. So they're limited to a large degree, and they have to get permission from the adjoining owner to do more beyond that. When I looked at it, my primary concerns were from a water quality standpoint, because that drives so much of the habitat and survivability and long-term sustainability of the resource, is to look at stabilization of where those outlets are occurring. Right now, there's quite a bit of disturbance. There's C&D material that's mixed in. There's clear soil erosion that's occurring during different storm events that's going into the watercourse channel. So by stabilizing those outlets, which they've indicated they've agreed to do, it'll help improve. It'll help minimize the transport of sediment, from storm events from the outlet area. And by doing that in combination with other measures which they're proposing, I think it's going to help with sustaining water quality and maybe even resulting in a net improvement to them. So in addition to that, I mean, they're doing an invasive species management, and I've asked them to put together a plan, which they, wanted to wait until after, the plan were approved. I prefer to see the actual plan as part of the overall mitigation strategy. And I'm sure that Jay will probably be willing to do that. And, so once, so they're removing the invasives, it's going to be, working to recreate, the function of the buffer by replanting. And they've got a nice mix of, trees, shrubs, and ground covers that are all native species, which will restore and enhance a buffer along the watercourse, which doesn't exist anywhere else on North State Road until you get, further down towards Water Park and everything. So I see that as the ways that they're minimizing is doing the, the restoration plan. And then another key component, which, Dan can address as well, is the site does not have any really what we would consider today's standard, New York State standard stormwater practices. So they're introducing that onto the site too, which is a tremendous benefit. You're getting, instead of having point discharge with no treatment, you're going to get, treatment by storage. They're addressing the storage issue and then also water quality. So that's another really important, I think, a really important mitigation measure when you're trying to restore buffer function. And that's really the most important thing is water quality in terms of, protecting our stream systems for, long-term impact.
Steve, can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
60 feet of that stream from the property line on the west side heading east, approximately 60 feet of that from the property line to the parking lot. Part of it's the playground, part of it's, why can't they just open it up? Why can't they open it up to look something like this?
What I'd like to do is finish my...
I'm just asking, I'm asking a very simple question. Because I'm having trouble understanding this.
I'll talk to you about the culvert aspect of it after, but I'd like to kind of go through what we've requested of the applicant, additional information that we requested them to have.
Go ahead, Steve.
I'm happy to address that, but I see a distinction between, water courses that have been previously altered and culverted versus natural stream systems that, and the wetland code addresses that as well. So, that's a distinction which I'm more than happy to talk about, after. But, one of the concerns I had is Mr. Fain had indicated that they did a phase 1 environmental assessment, of the property, and I wasn't able to see that report. But one of my concerns, because it was a nursery operation, is there tends to be a lot of contaminated soils on former nursery operations. So from just an environmental protection standpoint, I recommended that they do some samples to make sure or rule out that there isn't any significant contamination. And so that's why I requested some samples we take. And I don't know if I can ask Jay whether samples taken as part of the phase. Usually you don't do soil samples.
So I'm kind of outside my area of expertise, so I'll let the applicant address that.
Good evening, here. Matthew Jarmel. So, as a developer of a child care center, we take a lot of precaution about environmental issues. Interestingly enough, New York State doesn't have a provision that requires like an environmental sign-off from the DEP. Other states like New Jersey do, so we approached this like it was a state that did. And interestingly enough, this site is not the first site, or application I should say, for this site that's been before this board in the past. So over the last 10 years or so, there's been a significant amount of testing done. There was actually a phase 1 done and then a phase 2 done that included soil sampling that didn't find any pesticides or contaminants in the soil, which had it, we would move forward. So we then, and that was predated to our involvement in the development, we then hired our own environmental consultant to review all the previous records and their opinion, as with the understanding that there would be a child care center here, and their finding was that the site was clean and it should be fine. We can provide that documentation.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful just for board to have that information as part of the file.
So the applicant will be providing a copy of that?
We'd be pleased to, yes.
Continue, Steve.
And, what I've already mentioned it briefly, but, the outlet structures, the pipes, one of the concerns, as I mentioned, is there's a lot of erosion and, destabilization of the banks where they outlet. So they have proposed a, strategy to stabilize those areas. And I think it's, would be beneficial to do that. And, the challenge they have is because the outlets are very close to the property line, they don't have much area to work with without going onto the adjoining property. So, I think it's somewhat limited, but I think it's still an important element of, stabilizing so that we're minimizing any erosive action from, the volume of storm events. The flexi-paved surface that they're putting in the parking lot or in the playground area, one of the questions I had, and I would, defer to Dan to comment on that too, is I wanted to make sure that if they didn't have good soils to infiltrate, they needed to do some other practice to make sure that, the proper drainage, through that. Because if you don't, the standards I think are 3 feet in terms of, separation distance, and to be able to get good infiltration rates. And so they've proposed, because they weren't sure they had that with the soils, they're proposing to excavate out and put a more granular material that drains, and then they're going to correct that to the stormwater practices. So that's a technique that's been used, and it's pretty effective, but it will help with.
So the water that's gonna come off this parking lot, the storm water off the roof and everything like that, but the parking lot is gonna go drain into this water course, right?
No, well, it will, eventually, it's coming into stormwater practices first.
But any salt that they use on that property is now gonna be contaminated.
No, they're actually putting in stormwater practices. They have a.
And what takes that salt out of this thing that they're putting underneath the parking lot?
Well, my understanding.
How does the salt dissipate? Where's the
Mark,
salt?
can you give him a chance to answer?
My understanding from, and I would defer to Dan too, because he does stormwater more than I do. I look at it from a different perspective, but they're proposing, in addition, they have to meet New York State standards, which is volume and water quality. And by doing that, what they're doing is a combination of both, but they're also putting a vortex type system in, which filters out any kind of salts and sediments and other materials.
And where does someone come once a year or once every 6 months and sweep it out?
With those type of practices, they do require ongoing maintenance.
Can the architect show us where that is on your plan, that the things are out of this thing you're putting right here? How do you clean it out to get the salt out of it? How do you get the salt out of this?
Most of them have filters that get changed periodically. I'm sorry. Most of these units have a filter type system, related to a pool filter almost, where you have to change filters every periodically, 6 months after major storms. They have to be inspected, and if they're cartridges, they get replaced.
Let me just say, your
Mark,
name
I
and record.
think the bottom line is that there's a practice there that can be maintained and has to be pumped out periodically. It separates floatables and solids. The problem with salt is it's soluble. So the best we can do is provide infiltration, get it into the ground, because that'll help. But what you got to realize is that salt is used town-wide. And just because this property happens to be next to the stream, that the de-icing activities on the Taconic, on Route 100, on North State Road, is all soluble salt. So we could talk about it, but realistically, there's not a lot you can do about salt and de-icing.
But the salt, this is the first location from exiting Ryder Park. On Morningside Drive, there's a barrier right on either side of where the stream is, so the salt can get into it. But this is the first location
It's
where
not.
someone's gonna be
It's not,
using,
Mark.
could possibly use
You're getting
salt.
North State Road and all the town roads that drain into
I'm
that.
talking from Ryder Pond,
So am I.
going, this is the first this is the
I'm
first
so
location where
am I,
salt
Mark.
is gonna be introduced to it.
So am I. The water on North State Road gets in that brook.
The first main location.
Okay, can,
Main
Steve, will you finish with your
No,
report?
I have a couple more.
Let's finish off with Steve's report.
What we normally typically require within the wetlands code is a 5-year maintenance and monitoring plan for the wetland buffer mitigation. You know, and I'm recommending that it include the landscaping as well, but they've agreed to do that, and I would rather see it as part of, submitted prior to your approval of the site so that we have it, you know, as part of the record. And that they've agreed to do that. What the 5-year plan does is it has standards in terms of percent survival of the materials. And it also has criteria for how much invasives can come back, and they have to monitor and do an annual report, you know, and maintain those certain standards based on the approved mitigation plan. You know, so it's an effective way for the town to provide, you know, the follow-up, and usually within a 5-year period, you can anticipate that the plantings and the new activities will be sustainable at that point. And included with that, with landscaping, I wanted to make sure that they have and show on the site plan that they're putting in temporary deer fencing. You know, because no matter what type of plants you put in, they've done a terrific job of working with native plants that are usually more resistant to deer, but they're not foolproof, you know, nothing is anymore. And, you know, so temporary, fencing is critical. And then the other component I've asked for too is to provide temporary irrigation for the plantings, because, I mean, the native plants tend to not need as much water, but because you're introducing them into a new area and they're often from nurseries, it's important that they get, you know, a regular schedule of watering, especially during the first year or two. Yeah, but what I've suggested is they maintain it for the 5-year period so that, you know, it can be, you know, monitored and changed if need be.
Has the applicant seen this memo and reviewed it?
Yeah, again, Jay Fain. Yes, we have. We prepared a very detailed response to Mr. Coleman's comments. This is the second round of responses. I don't think there's really anything there that we stridently disagree with, and that we're going to work with Mr. Coleman to accomplish all his suggestions.
Yeah, I've made some suggestions which I've already incorporated in the plan to just increase the diversity of species, and then also you had some comments from the EAC members, you know, suggesting that too, which I thought was a good idea.
The only one comment I had for the board and for Mr. Coleman is that we put a row of evergreen plantings along here because the board had instructed us at a previous juncture that they wanted to provide screening between the neighboring properties. Mr. Coleman would asked us to kind of diversify this and spread these plantings out and mix it with some deciduous trees, and we just want to make sure that's okay with the board before we do that.
I had recommended that, in my experience, is that the word diversity, it's a good preventative for diseases. Almost every native tree has some kind of disease or pathogen that's attacking it. So the more diversity you have, you just stand a better chance of, you know, helping those plants, you know, survive.
Any objections?
Looks better also.
I personally think it looks better, yeah.
Any objections from the board on that amendment?
I have objections.
Okay, hold on a second. Yeah, that completes your report?
Yeah, I just wanted to address Mark's comment, you know, about the, you know, from your wetlands code. I mean, there's you're dealing with a site that has been previously piped. Water courses are piped, maybe not even part of this development years ago. Yeah, but I mean, you're dealing with a culverted system, which is a very different environment than a natural water course or, you know, buffer area. And your wetlands code doesn't necessarily treat, you know, a culverted system the same way as an existing natural water course. You know, and so.
A question, what is this up here on the, is that a natural water course?
I mean, from what I see, it looks like it's been channelized in its past history. You have a retaining wall on one side to stabilize it on the bank. I don't know whether that's a natural water course that was there, or whether that altered or moved or relocated.
And you've been to that site?
Yeah, I've walked the whole area, as part of the analysis. But I think it's important. I mean, there's been a trend to try to daylight, existing culverted systems, and we did that a little bit on the Argus application, that was planned and approved. I mean, in this particular case, I didn't really feel from your code standpoint that it really was integral to trying to restore and enhance with an open culvert, because I'm not sure that it would really create the environmental benefit of doing that. I mean, and also you would limit severely the amount of development for the applicant.
I had one question. I just wanted to make sure that the suggestions that both of you had for stabilizing the embankment around the culvert where it comes out won't impede the passage of fish in any way. Because they do actually go under North State Road and they emerge on the other side, so it's free passage. Just want to make sure that's...
Yeah, one of the things I didn't mention is they put in the memo that to make sure they looked at the substrate and, to make sure there wasn't any impact aquatic species on it. And I would suggest too that it would make sense for, if Jay's going to do it or their engineer to actually submit a plan of those proposed stabilization areas so that Dan could look at it to make sure that it complies with engineering standards.
Applicant has no objection to that?
No, we're embracing that suggestion, and we'll make sure that that whatever we do does allow for fish passage.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
I'm more concerned about the salt. I still want to see something done about it in a little bit more detail. This is not, I have grave concerns.
Okay, hold on a second.
Grave concerns.
Since some of the issues that Steve brought up were to be addressed by the engineer, Dan, do you have any comments at this time?
Well, we received a full-blown stormwater pollution prevention plan, I guess a month or two ago. And subsequent to that, I spoke with the engineer for the project, and he made some adjustments, and there's some further adjustments I'd like to make, but he's basically complying with the New York State standards. This is a redevelopment project, so there's also some, just by virtue of cleaning up the site, some benefit that's derived from that. But as I say, there's certain requirements to attenuate the peak flows and requirements to make water quality improvements. And the applicant is proposing that, so I don't see any great changes that would be required. I would say my comments are more like tweaks to the plan. But generally, the underground system that they're proposing should be able to comply with all the New York State regs.
Okay, so the applicant has no objections to the comments by the town engineer?
I think we were actually handed a few tonight that we haven't had a chance to look at, but nothing we've seen so far presents an issue.
Okay, all right.
Just reserving our rights to make sure there's nothing new that's shocking, which I don't anticipate.
Okay. Mark, you have some comments?
I'm still reviewing. I have to read this in detail.
Okay.
Excuse me, if I may, I'm looking at the memo, I guess from the engineer. There are 4 points. We have no problem providing information on all of them. The first one is providing evaluation of the condition of the existing 48-inch pipe. I think we had, in some of the meetings we had with the board previously, we had said we'd be pleased to videotape it to show the condition of it. That should typically, I just want to make sure it's an
as long as we
acceptable
just
practice.
memorialize that, and if it's determined that there are sections that are in need of repair, that's addressed prior to building a new parking lot over it.
We would certainly have to agree to repair anything that was found to be damaged.
especially since we're putting a parking lot on top of it. Yeah, so in response, although we just received this evening, we see no issue complying with this.
Very good, okay. Is there any members of the public wish to speak on this matter?
Donna Shara, 84 Morningside Drive. I looked through the documents that were on the website, so I think they're from September 25th, I believe. So I found some inaccuracies, perhaps some of them have been addressed, so I apologize if that's the case. But, so these are the things that I feel should be noted in all of the different documents. It states that the man-made pond in Ryder Park is where the stream originates, and that is not true. That pond receives water from the large wetland on Highview Farms and streams from the Ganong Drive area and the vicinity of Bethany Arts. You know, that whole park was a wetland, and they made that pond to take all that water so they could put ballparks in. So the water's coming from a lot of different places. Also, the ponds on Morningside Drive, which you can see from the car, receive water from Highview Farm property. Those ponds flow through the streams and wetlands and are culverted on 553 North State Road and Daylight just south of Terra Rustica. And then that becomes the stream that goes behind the property. So there's that water too. And then another source is to the east, which in all probability, but I can't exactly prove it except looking at topography and the GIS. It probably originates from the pond at the top of Hillcrest Avenue. The water flow from that area is visible in a small stream between the first two properties on the southwest side of where Ryder Avenue meets Gordon Avenue. This is an area that floods, so I think that we should consider all the water that goes into that area, and it's definitely not just that pond. The second thing is that it's not an isolated water course. It flows from headwaters upstream of the proposed project and goes all the way to the Hudson River. So it is listed somewhere that it is isolated, it is not. Third is that the stream is a Mechanical River tributary. It is not listed everywhere as that, and it should be. It also should be noted that the Mechanical River is a New York State designated inland waterway. The tributary that flows into the property permanently flows and is decidedly not intermittent. Perhaps that's been changed, I don't know. I am, of course, opposed to the disruption and destruction of the 50-foot stream buffer, which should not surprise anyone. I think that a wetland mitigation planting plan agreement should be required for the duration of the proposed use of this site, which was exactly what was required for Artist Senior Living. So it is not a 5-year plan. It goes with the life of the project. It does have that 85%, you know, that could 85% that you have to keep of the plants and all that, which I believe Mr. Coleman mentioned. But that on Artist Senior Living, that proposal, I think, is what should be for any wetland mitigation plan, because it's important to keep that to protect the stream forever, not just for 5 years. I saw somewhere, and it's not exactly something I understand, but it said that it was doing a stormwater plan based on a rain event of 2.8 inches, if I understood that correctly. We have had a lot more heavy rainfalls than that. So I hope that the plans are designed to handle much greater volumes, and climate change models predict increasingly more frequent and increasingly more severe storms in the Northeast. So that 2.8 is definitely not sufficient. It sounds like you were describing the downstream defender. It sounds like you're just using that on the impervious surface area, which would be great because it should not be used on any portion of the tributary, since it would potentially kill aquatic life. And then another thing which I am not really very familiar with, which is if I'm saying it correct, is the Gambian baskets around the riparian habitats, if that's what was being proposed. It's not just aquatic life that's in that, by those culverts, by the road. There's frogs. So there is also terrestrial wildlife, believe it or not, right by North State Road using that. So I am concerned if you're going to eliminate that as part of that process. Thank you.
Does the applicant have any response to that, Tom?
Sure. Gaping baskets are proposed at the outlet to the stream at the rear of the site. And that's to stabilize unstable soil condition in that location. No plans, and that's going to be an improvement over existing habitat. It's going to prevent erosion. There's no plans to put gaping baskets in the front of the site, which I think you're talking about. Gaping baskets are basically wire baskets filled with stones, so they do naturalize over time and become part of the habitat. They're good best management practice.
Donna, for your information, the gabion baskets actually over time create a lot of voids, and they actually
They
have
create a lot of what?
They create a lot of void spaces, so
Oh,
they've actually found that they serve that similar to a stone wall in terms of the habitat value
Okay,
for
great.
small mammals.
They're a low-tech solution to the problem. It's not like a poured concrete head wall. It's a natural solution. Thank you.
Donna, will you be submitting what you said in?
Yes, I could send it by email, would be
That'd
best.
be great.
Right.
Thanks. Okay, any other public comments?
My name is Wendy Masserman. I live at 10 Morningside Court in the town of Ossining. My husband and I designed, built, and have owned and operated 4 Kids Only Child Care Center on North State Road for 22 years. I'm pleased to have new business come on North State Road, and I'm not concerned that this new business will be a child care facility because we have very differing business models, and I think that will limit competition. My concerns are about the proposal of a 1-story, 10,000 square foot building on 1 acre of property. The footprint for our building is about 3,000 square feet on 2/3 of an acre. I've spoken in the past about overbuilding on properties in this area. I spoke about these issues when Artis was being proposed, and it was at that time that the planning board asked them to downsize to eliminate going so deeply into the buffer. And after several meetings and Donna Sherritt and a lot of other people coming out, the planning board got Artis to make some concessions. They went to a basement and they downsized their footprint. It seems that businesses that operate more than one location use a cookie-cutter approach to new projects. What works for one should work for all. I have no idea how large the other properties are for these learning centers, these 230 learning centers around the country, but 1 acre is small. As a result, the learning center is proposing to go into the buffers. These buffers were created to protect the waters that feed the Picantico River, which has been spoken about at great length tonight. Builders need to respect these buffers and design accordingly. From what I see on the plans, it appears that the play area is designed to be within this buffer. We need to protect our environment. Something needs to be downsized. The play area, the building, we need to meet code. Also, I'd like to know if the building meets the code for the percent of property that is allowed. It looks to me like it's more than 31%, which is our code. If you include the play space, I'm sure it's more than 31%. I'm also concerned that the project is proceeding without the Environmental Advisory Committee walking the site and issuing a report. I do not think that this should be rushed through. It's clearly an environmentally sensitive property. Thank you.
Sandy, did the EAC have a site visit yet?
They did not. They had offered a couple of dates, but they couldn't all make it on those dates. So we were gonna ask them if they have another date available for the EAC.
Okay, is the applicant working on that?
Yes, I've made several attempts to
get the
hook up with the
Yeah.
EAC, and I made myself available, so.
Some of those dates also, when I, at the EAC, when I was there, they also asked for some weekend times. Most of the dates they gave were in the middle of the week, and most of those people have jobs.
Okay, all right, so, but the applicant will work it out.
That's correct.
Good, okay. Does the applicant have any responses to the comments just heard?
The only thing I would say is a comment about the lot size and the building size. I mean, your zoning has a 30% building coverage requirement. We're at 23%, so it's not an outsized building. The minimum lot size in the district is 20,000 square feet. We're over, a little bit over an acre. Again, I think you're obviously, if you find environmental impacts, you can find buildings too big. But to say this is outsized or tremendous on this site is just not a fair statement, frankly.
Does staff have any comments on it? Further comments on this, ma'am?
I've got a memo.
Okay.
I'll review the memo.
Does the applicant have a copy of that, ma'am?
Not yet.
We do not.
But Mark will give them a copy of insurance.
Is there any other public comments? Seeing none, okay.
Adam, this copy for you.
Thank you.
Sure. So we had quite a few comments in our last memo, and a lot of work has been done on this project, so we have relatively few comments left. If we start on the middle of page 2, signage, there was an issue as to whether or not the building inspector would determine that variances were needed for the signage. And John Hamilton has issued an email dated September 13th, 2018, where he identifies several variances that will be needed for the freestanding and building mounted signage. So at the appropriate time, the applicant would go to the zoning board of appeals for those variances. In our last memo, we mentioned that the North State Road elevation should look more like the front of a building if the building orientation were to remain as it is. And I think an effort has been made to make the west elevation look more like the front of the building, but I frankly think it could be improved even more. Can we put that elevation up for a moment? And I appreciate the effort that was made. And of course, this is up to the planning board sitting as the ARB on this project to.
I agree with you. There was an effort. It could go a little farther. The small doors kind of give it away.
Yeah, I would say even if some of the fenestration needs to be faux fenestration, because you have constraints regarding how you're using the space inside.
Right.
But I think you can, I know you can do a better job.
So your suggestion is to add faux fenestration?
Well, however you do it, if real fenestration, faux fenestration, maybe those, I'm not sure what you call those little things to the right and left of the main elevation?
Eyelet.
Those eyelets? No.
Oh,
Yeah,
dormers.
those guys?
Called dormers, right.
Maybe
Okay.
those?
We can certainly do that.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. Thanks. And then the last comments we have are traffic comments, which are pretty technical in nature. The first item has to do with turning radius for the access, and we believe that turning templates for an SU-30 vehicle should be used. And additional turning movement should be shown. And then in terms of the site access, there should be revision to the intersection and/or stopping site distance measurements used. So it's just homework. No showstoppers.
And the applicant just received this? Yes. Does the applicant need time to review these comments?
Good evening, Frank Filiciotto with Stonefield Engineering, traffic engineer for the project. Good evening. Just reviewed this as well, and I agree with Mr. Stolman that there's nothing in here that is unsurmountable. And we'd be happy to work with the town and its consultants in addressing these matters, specifically with respect to the radius and justifying the site distance that was used. So
Great.
no issues with that.
Any other comments from the board right now? Mark?
If it's dealing with comments about the turning radius, could you please just show a fire truck radius going around that with cars in those spots? I'd like to see that a fire truck could go, make a nice enter and exit.
We'd be happy to do that.
Most likely probably can, but it's not.
I'm not sure a fire truck would actually go and try to turn around in there. If there were cars, they would
Right.
just back out. They would stop traffic, stop all
Right.
traffic, and back out. Any comments?
At the risk of prolonging this, we did get on the signage, and I apologize for prolonging it. There are 4 signs that are at issue. There's one on each of the walls which has the logo of the development. I shouldn't say each of the walls. One facing north on the main entrance to the building. We had added one to the west elevation facing North State Road to help make it look as if it's the front of the building. You have pictures of the signs with photographs of what they will look at. Those 2 are both 3 foot 6 inches high. 2 feet is allowed under your code in terms of height. The monument sign would, under your code, have a limit of 20 square feet on each face. It's actually a little less than twice that. And your building inspector has determined that the blocks which are on the pylons, which have the numbers and the letters, because they have 1, 2, 3, and A, B, C, D, are signs under your code. So we would need to go to the zoning board for variances in 3 cases and perhaps a variance in an interpretation. We do have the interpretation from the building inspector via email. We are concerned that there may be a 60-day limit to actually submit our application. So while we don't expect any kind of formal determination, if the board has any strong adverse reaction to what we've shown you, we would love to know that now before we go too far down that road. Understanding it doesn't commit you to anything.
I think the signage looks appropriate, frankly.
I agree.
And if I could just finish the thought, there is this email from John Hamilton. I don't believe the planning board members individually got a copy of this email, so Sandy's going to send it out to you. But essentially, John says they need several variances.
I think the columns with the ABC so forth is cute. So I support it.
You gotta like Bubbles the elephant too.
They're learning blockchain technology right off the bat.
Yeah.
Sorry.
As long as the lights on, like, I think we talked about it, that they shut off at a certain time at night, and I had no problems with the signage either.
Understood.
It's more dealing with the environmental.
Oh, question. I didn't hear what you just said, but the signage that faces west, is it lit or unlit?
All the signage, with the exception of the ABC 1 through 3 blocks, is lit. We can certainly control it. We close at 6:30, so we don't have a problem shutting the lights off after business hours. I mean, the signs off after business hours.
Is it lit internally or from the outside?
It is an internal.
Internal. So, I have an objection to that aesthetically. That makes it, to my eye, makes it start to look like a strip mall characteristic.
The signage is understanding the zoning varies from trademarks, but it's a registered trademark, so I'm not sure the tenant would waiver.
Is there any way you could consider just external lighting on a non-electrified sign? That would be my preference anyway.
I would be pleased to ask our tenant, but my guess is they would say no. So
Why would it make it, if it's internally lit, then it's like it's not neon, presumably.
But it's after 6:30, it shuts off.
Well, that's true. If we're imposing a shut-off time,
Well,
then.
do you have a problem shutting it off?
Not at all.
Then in that case, it's irrelevant, so. I'm okay
Thank you.
with it. am.
It probably would be.
It would be
nicer, but it's. You're okay with what?
With his suggestion.
Okay. Mark, do you have any opinions on it?
When the lights shut off or like
No, no, no.
lit from the house?
Outside as opposed to
Frankly, I
internal.
think a non-lit sign is going to be
It's a
more
much
attractive.
classier look. All
I
right.
don't necessarily want to see a
So,
neon type sign.
we'd like to revisit the sign issue. Is it okay for me to proceed?
Yeah, fine.
So, several of the board members have spoken up, or at the table, that we think an externally lit sign would be much more attractive, and we would like to request that. If, I don't know if we have to take a vote to request that, but I think
Now,
three of
were
us
were those
anyway.
planning board members that said that, or ARB members that said that?
They are ARB members that said that.
Or planning board.
It's
For a site
different
plan.
hat. There we go. So, I mean, I shouldn't speak for the board members, but
I agree.
And Mark,
I'll go with the majority.
Yeah. I mean, I don't particularly have a feeling for it because I don't trust my citizens as much as my colleagues do. So I'm willing to at least ask your client to consider it because if their aesthetic thoughts are accurate, it may benefit your client to have that type of sign rather than slavishly follow a trademark issue. If it is a trademark issue, I don't know whether they normally say that the sign has to be lit from the inside for a trademark point, but.
Again, I'm not in the position as a developer to say yes or no. I have a lease requirement to provide signage, so it's kind of my obligation to try and get it. If you don't approve it, I'm good at it. I'll certainly ask the question. If I can convince them, I will. Otherwise, we're going to ask for the variances associated.
I don't think that the board is having an issue with the variance in terms
Right.
of the.
The lighting though, but
Right.
aren't,
There wouldn't be a variance
for lighting?
because there's no requirement that it be externally lit.
I see. And what, you suggesting like a gooseneck light that shines over on it, or?
We'll leave that to
spots, I think, yeah.
We'll leave that
Spots
to
from the ground?
We'll leave that to your design sense to determine what kind of light to have, but it will be a nicer sign without the internal lighting. And there are very few hours that you're going to need it lit anyway.
I'll certainly explore it with our tenant. Please do that.
Okay, any other public comments at this time? No, okay, any comments from the staff? Okay. Mark, just so that the applicant understands what your concerns are, just make a brief statement about what your environmental concerns are.
Again, Donna earlier mentioned where all this water is coming from. And the majority of it, we know where it is. And yes, we know there's two 48-inch pipes that go through the property. And obviously, when you're doing your construction work and you're digging up the building and you're putting the building in, if you see contaminants and it's tested, it's gonna be removed. When you start doing the pavement for the driveway, for the parking lot, and if someone sees that the pipe is damaged, obviously it's gonna be repaired. I'm fine with those elements of that, because yes, it was a garden center. And for 50 years or whatever it was, they probably put God knows what chemicals on that property for holding dirt and everything else and plants and everything from Miracle Grow, who knows? Who knows what they had on that property? And I'm just, where I see you're putting like the playground in, I think children would love to see a little bit of what can be done out there. I think to see the environment, it's called the Learning Center. A learning center, to see a little bit about what the environment is, to show that, hey, we have 40 feet before the parking lot. maybe we should just open it up a little bit so that these children can see it, can see what's there, can see the fish, can see the frogs. I've seen the frogs, I have not seen the fish there. You go into Ryder Park, go up to Highview Farms, sure, it's there. This is just a continuation of it. I don't have a problem with building this thing. I think it's great for the town. I think it's great for the environment, and great for the community. I just would like the Learning Center to at least accommodate even 1% more of the environment. I'm concerned about this salt. I'm concerned about the salt going into the river, into Rockefeller and into the Hudson River. I am concerned about something like that. I want a little bit more daylighting. I've read about daylighting. There's a lot of positive elements of that. That there's going to be always something that's going to say, oh no, don't do it. There are fish in that river, they're sure. Please, in order to get my vote, I'm looking for a little bit more openness of the river. And I would like it truly to say watercourse, Botanical River, tributary to the Hudson River, whatever it is. And I really, at that point, I might even ask our environmental consultants to pass it on to a higher authority that might have jurisdiction in Westchester about this water and this culvert that's underneath it, these pipes.
Okay.
That's my assessment at the moment.
Okay, thanks. Is there anything else we have to do at this point?
I don't believe so.
Well, I have
Adam may
3
disagree.
requests. Request number 1 is, since we saw the photos for the first time tonight, if they could be made part of the record, either by being put up on the website or so we provided
I
copies of
emailed you
them.
those photos.
It would be greatly appreciated, so we can figure out locations anywhere. Number 2, I don't know if your board is ready, but we would certainly make the request that you consider closing the public hearing and consider directing Mr. Stallman and Ms. Lantis to draft a negative declaration on this.
I think we probably want to wait for the EAC report, see what that says. And that would be a reason not to do the neg deck or the close of the public hearing right now. But on the other hand, if the EAC is not going to render a report, we don't want to wait forever.
Can one of the board members?
I'm the liaison, so I'll talk with them. I'm meeting them next week.
Because I know that they did want to do a site visit, but I think we do
Yes.
have to make sure that that happens, and then we get the report, so.
Can we make a draft, the neg deck contingent on an EAC report?
I can start working on the neg deck, but I think we need this EAC report before we go anywhere with it.
Okay.
We're not asking you to act on it. We just would love to get that process
And I don't
started.
believe we can close the public hearing in any event, because we still have, you're still gonna go to the zoning board and then come back to this board for site plan approval, so you wanna just keep the hearing open.
Even a technical.
We can talk legally. I don't know that we need this hearing open to deal with the variances. We do need the negative declaration to get that
Right.
board to act on the variances.
Right.
That we do need.
Right.
That's correct.
I'll start working on the neg deck.
That's greatly appreciated. And I thank
If
you for
that's
your
the direction
patience.
of the board.
I hope I haven't belabored things too much.
Okay, thank you. The fourth item on the agenda is the San Francisco Chamber subdivision 3741 Cove Dam Road subdivision and lot line amendment. The applicant here?
Do we have an adjourned date for the hearing? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we should adjourn it.
I apologize.
No, we should have one.
I should have said that once here.
I should have realized you didn't
I
say.
promise I'll leave.
November 17th?
November 7th.
November what?
November 7th. Okay.
7th?
November
The
7th.
next date is October,
For the,
the next date is October 17th.
continuation. Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you very
Mark,
much.
November 7th is okay?
For this one?
No, this is
You really
the continuation of the public.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
No objections?
Thank you.
So was I.
Thank you.
You too, as always.
Happy to help
Yeah. No problem. I hope, yeah, I hope you get that. I'll see you there.
And give the applicant a copy. Thanks.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for presenting us again. My name is Matt Steinberg. I'm with the planning and engineering firm Gibney, Town Schwalbe. We represent Val Santucci and Valerie Schemmer, who are with me tonight. They're the owners of the property and the applicants. Since the last time that we were before your board, we have submitted a revised set of subdivision plans. We've addressed the majority of the comments. I see that the town engineer, the town planner has provided a couple comments. I see that there's a few things that it looks like we may have missed. We will continue to work to have those on there. None of them seem to be largely unsurmountable to add to the plans. The site surveyor has been authorized to prepare the plat now that we've gone through the general layout with this board. That's in progress. We hope to have that shortly to submit to the board. It will essentially look like the plans that we've submitted, but with meets and bounds, the easements shown, and some of the utilities shown that weren't shown previously that the town engineer has requested. One of the ongoing matters that we have been discussing with this board that we copied you on is the the tree removal based on the town's tree code. We're continuing to review that. We provided some additional information as far as what our tree removal is, how many trees would remain, and how we found it difficult to provide the requisite number of inches based on the code. And that we would like to go forward at some point and discuss with the town board using the town's tree bank to essentially to pay for the inches that cannot be provided on site.
Tree bank fund.
Tree bank fund.
The nomenclature is a little confusing. The tree bank is
Right.
what we're referring to as planting trees off-site, and the tree bank fund is where you would put
Correct, yes.
a different kind of green in.
Yes, you're right. And I believe in our letter we made sure we said fund. So it's the fund for the town's use to plant those trees somewhere. We've also, in our submission, formally requested a steep slope permit. We had briefly described the steep slopes in our original submission. We have a steep slopes map included in our set. We've updated it with some additional data on our cover sheet of the plans as requested by Mr. Stolman to show how we are, we still meet the minimum lot sizes even with the steep slopes excluded from the site per the code. We provided a truck turning diagram, showing emergency access up to both both residences as requested by the town engineer. We provided a draft of the notice of intent. I see that there are some changes to the SWIP that are requested, and we will have that data added. We are working with the applicant to get on site to do some soil testing. Once we have that, we'll add that information to the SWIP and provide it to the town engineer. I guess procedurally, what I would like to discuss is, at what point this board would be willing to open a public hearing. So we understand that we have the continuing tree matter. We are not, at this point, asking for a tree permit to remove the trees. We're also not seeking the ARB approval at this time. We know the applicant will have to return as they fully design the residences, as they do a detailed landscape plan for whoever might be purchasing those properties, whether or not they want to see some trees moved around. So we understand that we'll have to continue to look at that, but I'm not sure we're going to be able to resolve that while we're reviewing the subdivision plat.
Why don't we talk about the review comments and then get to the process after?
Sure.
If that's okay with the planning board. Go ahead. Shall I go through my memo?
Yes, please.
So if we start sort of in the middle of page 2, talking about trees and tree replacement, and this is basically what was just stated, but with some numbers attached to it. So in the middle of page 2, not sheet 2, so 1,072 caliper inches of trees would be removed for the subdivision, requiring the replacement of 1/2 of that, or 536 caliper inches of trees. There are going to be quite a few trees planted, and actually it would be 324 caliper inches, leaving a deficit of 212 caliper inches. And as stated in the application, if you assume that the average caliper is 2.5 inches, this would result in approximately 85 trees that would not be replaced. I'm not sure whether the town board intends to I don't know how they intend to set the fee, but either by caliper inches or by trees or what have you. Anyway, the letters state that the deciduous trees would be 3 inches in diameter at installation, and the flowering trees would be 2 inches in diameter. But the landscape plan is a little bit in conflict with that. It says that the deciduous trees would be 2.5 to 3 inches, and the flowering trees would be 2.5 inches. So these two sources of information need to be reconciled, and the letters and our landscape plan should be revised accordingly. Before I get into all this, I should say that a lot of work was done between the last submission and this submission. We had quite a few additional comments on various subjects, and they were accommodated and resolved. In our last memo, we stated that there should be a note that says there will be no direct driveway access to lots 1 and 3 from Croton Dam Road. And the applicant was proposing to put on sheet SP 0.0 in the plat this note: access to the 4 lots from Croton Dam Road shall be limited to 2 driveways. But that's really not the same thing. 2 of the lots just don't have any access, right?
Correct.
And 2 of the lots do. So the note should say there will be no direct driveway access to lots 1 and 3, as opposed to your note. You follow the difference?
Yes, we were just concerned about should the existing lot not, if it hasn't been fully subdivided yet, we were just concerned whether or not then there'd be access to the rear lot, or if we were switched lots around. We can look again. I think we can accommodate the same note.
You could always change that by coming back to the planning board to get the note revised. Are you suggesting if they wanted separate driveways, for example, or something like that?
We'll look again. I think you're right. I think we can.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
We can use the note, and
if you want to talk about it, just give me a call. We're looking at the site distance information, and comment number 4 really has to do with the meets and bounds being shown for the easement areas. A maintenance agreement for the driveways needs to be provided. And then the drawing, the subdivision plan and the plat should indicate who the easements are in favor of, which is pretty easy to do. And then we just mentioned, as was mentioned earlier, that the applicant is not applying for ARB approval, and that kind of approval would be required prior to the issuance of a building permit for each new home. So there's really not a whole heck of a lot. And I believe, Kathy, I think you had said that the town board is taking up the tree bank fund.
The fund probably
Soon.
next week or the week after, so.
Just out of curiosity, is there any space along Croton Dam Road where we have land that belongs to the town, where it would be an appropriate place to line the street with some of these trees?
We could look into it. I don't know the answer to that.
Any further to the left or right?
Across the street, your site plan calls the Stony Lodge property Veterans Park.
We can update that.
Yeah, so if we can update that. But along the Stony Lodge property, we have a long stretch of Croton Dam Road. If there's, I think it would be appropriate to cross the street from the applicant's property. If there's some place to plant the trees along that stretch of road, I think it would be a nice addition.
I'm not suggesting that it wouldn't, but the trees would either be in the right of way. I'm not sure that
Just asking if
it could be in the right of way,
if
and
it's
I'm not sure that
appropriate.
it's the River Knoll property, right?
Yes.
So what says on Veterans Memorial Park is incorrect, right? That's River Knoll.
Yeah.
River Knoll, yeah.
We can certainly look into it.
Well, it's not River Knoll yet.
Right. It's still Stony Lodge.
Stony Lodge.
We can look into it.
But that's also where the word Croton Dam, with Croton is, that's where the entrance is right now to Stony Lodge.
Do we get a say about where to put trees? I'm just offering
It's
a
ultimately left to
suggestion.
the town board, but they might appreciate a suggestion or two.
Good enough, all right. It might be easier because they'll have the same equipment nearby, so.
Right, and keeping it close to home, I would think it would be a nice spot, but,
It would enhance the same road.
yeah.
Any other comments, Dave?
That's it.
Okay. Dan, did you have comments?
Yeah, I had a couple of brief comments, which actually the applicant is aware of, and actually in their response letter. And two of them really reflect, once we get the plat, that'll address having to show where the existing water and sewer services are for the two existing homes. The plat was the other comment, and then they also stated that they still hadn't done the soil testing for the stormwater pollution prevention plan. So that would complete that document once we receive that. So, you know, the plans are pretty far along, and I'm pretty comfortable with them at this point.
Board have any comments at this time? I don't see any members of the public other than the applicants. Are there any members of the public comments? Hearing none. Okay, what do we need to do at this point?
Put on for public hearing would be the next step.
Okay. Do you think it would be ready for that time?
You have to notice it, you have to do the notice requirements.
Noticing.
So.
What is here's the dates?
You could do that. I could give them everything tomorrow
To do the noticing?
to do it for the 17th.
So,
Yeah.
Well, it's either October 17 or November 7th.
You might want to just change the front page of your drawing and just correct
Yes.
it from Veterans Memorial Park.
We'll certainly,
Yeah.
we'll certainly make that update, that's what it is.
So we should read this. So we need to determine whether this is a minor or a major subdivision, because the procedure is different for each. A minor subdivision is a one-step process, just subdivision approval. A major subdivision has preliminary approval and final approval. So let me read the definition of minor, and let's see, this has to do with utilities as well. So a minor subdivision is a subdivision containing not more than 4 lots, which has frontage on an existing public street, which this does, and which does not require any new municipal street street extension or extension of municipal facilities. So is there any extension of municipal facilities?
No, we're just adding water and sewer services.
Services to
So
the
there's
lots?
no, there's no water or sewer services intended for dedication to the town.
Right. So this would be a minor subdivision, which is a one-step process. So this public hearing would not be on preliminary approval, it would be on subdivision approval of a minor subdivision.
Okay.
Four.
And what was the other, the major one, the other?
Major is any subdivision containing more than 4 lots, or any subdivision requiring any new public street extension or the extension of municipal facilities.
So that doesn't apply.
That doesn't apply. So this is a minor subdivision.
All right. So the only distinction for us would be that it's one step rather than two?
Yeah, and the public hearing notice would not say preliminary subdivision, it would say just subdivision approval.
Okay. All right, but which date are we choosing? 17?
We could do that.
Yeah, we can notice, and we will make the updates, get that back in, and we'll continue to process all the other stuff to respond to the comments in the interim.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so we had, everybody had a chance to look at the minutes?
I'll be on the morning.
Yeah, no,
Want to comment?
But I'll get the label.
You have one?
No, I've already clarified with
Oh, okay.
Sandy and
All right,
she
any comments on minutes?
fixed them.
No, I'm fine.
Want to say?
You too.
Bye, thanks.
Ciao.
Okay, so,
Couldn't hurt. And actually, I'm wrong about preliminary. Cross that.
So we'll just call it subdivision, steep slope permit.
what was the change you made?
Yep.
This is all the same page where we're agreeing with.
Any questions?
First item, the second paragraph, originally it was written that the retaining wall would require an additional building permit. So what we did was we clarified that the building permit could be part of the engineering work with the drawings. But it's before us for height, aesthetics, and the effect on the site.
Mark, you okay with that change?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Sandy, you had those changes from
Yes,
right?
I
Okay.
did.
So do we have a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes.
Any second?
I'll second.
Great. No objections? Passed. Any new business? Any other business? Last, anything? No? Any motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Thank you. No objections? Thank you, folks. At least we got ahead before